The ratio.
of plane to everything.
Oh.
And then we can extrapolate how many vehicles that work.
I think you need to take charge of that.
I just think we need to take a vote. Just take a vote.
We could craft it.
But if you,
It comes up to spring break, so there might be a lot of people going.
But there are people coming home.
But there are people coming home too, yeah.
well, I think what we need to do is,
Yes.
you have to figure out how many people, you have to take an average of the amount of people who are here for
Okay.
a month. And then,
Oh, no.
Then you have to throw in.
It's
how
not
many
about
everything
it's
in.
not about averages.
You know what's happening now.
No,
I think
but
we're getting-
sometimes.
I think we're getting a few people from Fairmont coming in to just.
Oh, that's real?
Try this out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, well, then they can only get half.
they get half a day.
They can run back. Yeah. I'm glad we figured that out. That's what we usually figure out.
Yeah.
You should know that by now.
I know.
How kind of
Well, they can do it in a sanctuary, but the school, they're going to build their house. So that's it.
No, you need it.
I know, I agree.
Oh, yeah, how was the?
Oh, I don't think it was.
Was there a lot
I
of
don't
people
think
there?
it's keep up with it. Do it.
That's great.
You know, since Jonathan made his exit, or however it was. I don't, I'm on the board. But that's just something. Well, yeah, but anyway, I'm saying, it's throwing a lot of stuff on. You know, him and all that. We're no kidding. Pretty awful.
Where did you think we would all say? They got a good one.
Drew that was
Good, how are you?
Yeah, I saw you working, the other Sunday, but I didn't bother.
Of course, I was so busy. Oh, really? So my heart is
She gets a sale.
So, I'm going in. You can come with. You should. And yeah. I didn't get it. But I got more. Yeah. Tennis. Oh, yeah, and that's the speaker she said. Oh, I didn't mean to do that already. Thank you. Oh, I know.
Morning. Still, I know.
Developing a good cold, so
I can hear it.
the earlier you can get.
I'm going to work on them right up to Torah Study and get them to you by noon or so. You have your Caravaggio picture, don't you?
Yeah.
So I'll give you the order. Just 4 things, including the
Where do
Torah.
you want the picture?
I think first. Great. Take care of yourself. Good morning.
Yes.
Why is that? Yeah.
I had our radio, Bach on top of it.
Each year I will be in
I wrote the
for today. Stab is a stab, isn't it?
yes.
And what comes after? I willfully will. What's the word after Hochstab?
Hochstab.
K with a K?
Yes.
Hoich. I don't know that word. Good morning. How are you? Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, so
So I've been running back.
very bad.
I'm still at this class. It's all like a thing that spoke up.
Right, and we're gonna do more next week because more people are having childhood stuff. Yeah. Let me know what
It's not too late for quarantine.
I didn't. Thanks. Did you figure it out? Let me pass these out, and I'll come over to you in a minute. Klein. Okay. I will.
Carry the cloth.
Is that who's on it? It's also, well, you remember at the end of the Matthew Passion, it's Joseph of Arimathea, who is accompanied that long aria. Remember it?
Yeah,
So glorious. So what's the guilt card here?
I thought you were listening to that.
Those who wish to concerned about I mean, come on, we're big enough to who is unbelievable, isn't he? You know, I did that with the organizer. You know that. Were you there?
No.
But you know, I did a vow for you know,
Oh, yes.
the wedge, you know, the wedge, dun, 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 What would life be with you? There's a cartoon, New Yorker cartoon many years ago, which is a moonscape. And the title was The Captured Life Without Moses. Oh, I agree with that. No marriage is that would be a real loss. Don Giovanni. But marriage, I think, but Don Giovanni's in my view, I had this argument with you. I say to myself, everything is the reality of acting. I am not. Good morning, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to those who are live streaming. I'm passing out a long passage from the Talmud, which we'll get to later today, I hope. First of all, let me thank those who participated in the bagel enterprise. Bagel sponsored by Jackie Weiner. Pickup by Joan Levy. Thank you, Joan. And it looks like the Torah Study Fund is sponsoring live streaming this morning. Torah Study Fund bails us out. Okay. I have some sad news. Some of you already know that George Morris passed away yesterday. After a long, George used to sit right over there next to Gary and Eileen. Dear friend of mine and of many of you I know. George was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 4.5 years ago. That's a death sentence. He was given 3 months to live. He fought for 4.5 years, and it finally took him. So let's just pause for a moment and silently remember George. Okay. Funeral will be Monday at 1 o'clock at Berkowitz. Okay. It's a little hard to move on, frankly, when we lose dear friends and wonderful people. Yeah. Okay. A blessing for the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav etzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We praise you, Lord our God, sovereign of the universe, who sanctifies us through God's commandments and joining upon us the obligation to immerse ourselves in words of Torah. Amen. Okay. So we are continuing our investigation of the idea of humility. We've gone through several passages. I want to first review a passage that we looked at last week near the end, and that is Deuteronomy chapter 8. Chapter 8, verse 11. Deuteronomy is the 5th book of the 5 books of Moses. When somebody gets the page in the English, I'm sorry? 288. Okay, so I just want to say what I think this passage means, and then let's read it. So this reviews some of the history and then points to some of the obligations that follow from that history. I tried to make a case last week. I want to emphasize the word tried. I don't present this as doctrine and dogma, and if you disagree with it, too bad for you. That is not my view of it, but I always like, and it's one of my mottos in life, we can't know that we have gone too far until we go too far. And once we recognize we've gone too far, we step back a little bit. But we don't know what the boundary of possibility is until we push against it. Am I right about this? So we always have to speculate. If we've got a good idea and it seems plausible, in my view, push it. And then backtrack if it's not working out. Okay, so that's what I've tried to do here. My suggestion is that this passage is not just reviewing history, but it is laying down the foundations of communal life. In a way, what this passage is suggesting is that the world and the history and the key events of our history give us the potential, the possibility of living a full and rich life, and living that life now is incumbent upon us to do, since the world, through the potential laid down, become imperatives. I have given you this Don't just say thank you. Don't just acknowledge it. Live your life in the presence of the implications of those events. That's what I'm suggesting. So let me read it, and then we'll talk about it. We did last week a little bit, but we can continue. Take care lest you forget the Lord your God and fail to keep his commandments, his rules, and his laws, which I enjoin upon you today. That's the imperative. That's what we're to bring to actualization, the following of these rules and laws. When you have eaten your fill and have built fine houses, I want to back up a little bit. It just occurs to me to say something about this. Maimonides in the Guide for the Perplexed in Part 3 talks about laws as serving two kinds of health, the health of the body and the health of the soul. All the laws point to those goals. The health of the body takes two forms. Our particular bodies, maintaining our personal health, and the body politic, the community. So all the laws, first of all, point to ways of keeping two kinds of body healthy, and the second is the health of the soul, the health of our well-being, which Maimonides says is not first in time, but first in importance. The health of the body is the necessary condition for the health of the soul, but the health of the soul is most important. In other words, the laws have utility. In this sense, Maimonides is a utilitarian. He does like the idea of obeying the laws for their own sake. But the laws, the mitzvot, also have purposes in mind. I'm giving a talk tomorrow to the Forest Hills Church on a rabbi's view of Paul's New Testament letter to the Galatians, in which Paul is pretty harsh on the law. There's a good reason for this, I think, that Paul feels greatly under assault by the Judaizers, and therefore is a bit intemperate. He calms down in the book of Romans, where he has a much more nuanced, in the letter to the Romans, a much more nuanced view of the law, in which he comes to appreciate to some degree, the higher law, he might say, which is embodied in the law. So here in the Deuteronomy passage, the law comes to be a vehicle for the good life. And not, as Paul, I think, would suggest, it binds us, it enslaves us. We can't possibly fulfill it, according to Paul. And this is part of the function of the law, according to Paul. It lets us know that following the law is impossible for us, and therefore we're always going to be in bondage. And therefore it reminds us that there must be a better way. And he proposes a better way, faith. So here at the beginning, the Torah has a very positive view of the law. Okay, so let's start again. Take care lest you forget the Lord your God and fail to keep his commandments, his rules, his laws, which I enjoin upon you today. When you have eaten your fill and have built fine houses to live in, and your herds and flocks have multiplied, and your silver and gold have increased, and everything you own has prospered, all of these things which we can accomplish through our own actions and so forth, so therefore we can be beguiled in thinking that it is just totally a result of our own actions. So Moses here is reminding us that there are conditions that make it possible for us to do our work. Verse 14, beware lest your heart grow haughty and you forget the Lord your God. The opposite of humility, or we might say that humility is a warning against pride, against thinking that we are the sole source of the well-being of our lives. Beware lest your heart grow haughty and you forget the Lord your God, who freed you from the land of Egypt, the house of bondage, freedom as a condition, who led you through the great and terrible wilderness, with its serpents and scorpions, a parched land with no water in it. I tried you in the wilderness. I tempted you and showed you that you are not fully the master of your own fate. Who brought forth water from you? What's the source of your well-being? But God's endowments, natural, let's say, endowments from you, from the flinty rock, who fed you in the wilderness with manna. Manna is, you remember maybe the etymology of the word man, Haman. Haman, what is it? Man who? Manna, man who? What is it? In other words, manna points to mystery. And mystery points to things that we don't control. And therefore, manna not only fed us in the wilderness, it is symbolic of the wonders of life. There are two ways of looking at the idea of miracle. The first was really articulated most clearly by the philosopher David Hume. Miracle is a violation of the laws of nature. So that in a certain way, this view of miracle is dependent on the scientific revolution, which uncovered the laws of nature. And if I throw a ball up in the air and it doesn't come down, that's a miracle, because the laws of nature suggest that everything that goes up comes down. So for Hume, the necessary condition for a miracle are the regularities of the natural world. And when they're violated, like the splitting of the Red Sea, that's a miracle. Abraham Joshua Heschel dislikes that view because it's dependent upon science in a way, and thinks that we should be talking instead about wonders, the mysteries, the things we can't explain but we know exist. And when Heschel was asked, what to you is a wonder, his answer was everything. Everything is a wonder. If I just look even at the regularities of nature, those themselves are wonders. That the world, let's put it this way, works for us. That I can get up in the morning and put my feet on the floor with confidence. That doesn't have to be the case. I can put my feet on the floor and the floor will not hold me. The sun is going to shine every single morning. It's going to come up every single morning. It's going to go down at night. I can count on it. I don't even have to note it anymore. It's not a miracle. It's a regularity. But that regularity is a wonder. So manna, so the exodus from Egypt is freedom. The wandering in the wilderness is a test of our understanding of the nature of things. And manna it represents the wonders of life. One of them is that I can plant corn and be somewhat confident that it's going to yield corn in the future. Of course, it's not inevitable, but generally farmers plant because they have confidence that that is going to yield something positive. Who fed you, verse 16, in the wilderness with manna, which your fathers have never known, in order to test you by hardships, only to benefit you in the end. And you say to yourselves, in other words, this is a big dash, right? In verse 14, beware lest your heart grow haughty and you forget the Lord your God, parentheses, here's all the things that God has done for you, for which you shouldn't forget, lest you forget, and now we're in 17, and you say to yourselves, you see, those dashes are parentheses. They don't exist in the Hebrew, but the syntax points to it. My own power and the might of my own hand have won this wealth for me. This is not just a mistake, it's a big mistake. It's a big mistake in the sense that it's easy to say, and partially true, that the might of my own hand have won this wealth for me, right? We go to work in the morning, or we work on a project, and doggone it, we earn money, we bring it home, or the project comes to fruition. Who did that? I did it. The power of my own hand is real, but I have to recognize what are the conditions for the possibility of being effective myself. So everything I do is a combination of what I've done and what was necessary as a precondition for my being able to do what I've done. And that's what this passage is doing, it seems to me. So here, humility is not, it's certainly not Roger Federer humility, that he lost and lost and lost some big matches, and therefore he's pretty low. He's been defeated. If he's haughty, he's been brought low. This is not humility as being brought low. Humility here is a way of living life. It's a worldview which brings together the events of the 5 books of Moses, which now are serving as conditions for the possibility of something. I have to laugh because, so this is, I pointed this out last week, this is really Immanuel Kant's whole program of philosophy, into what he calls a transcendental philosophy, to point to the conditions for the possibility of knowledge, for the possibility of ethics, for the possibility of aesthetics. One of the conditions for the possibility of being moral is free will. I can't prove, this is Kant's argument, I can't prove that there's free will. In other words, I might say, and I can't disprove it, that everything is predetermined, that I just feel free, but I'm really controlled by forces out of my control. That's possible. For Kant, if we want to have moral responsibility, if that's what we feel we have and need to have, what is the condition for the possibility of the moral life? This is his argument. The condition for the possibility of the moral life is freedom, freedom of the will. I can't prove that I have free will, but if I don't assume it, the whole moral life falls to the ground. And I believe firmly that that can't happen and doesn't happen, that I have free will. And therefore, freedom, though can't be proven, is a possibility, is what is the condition for the possibility. You see the argument here? So I'm sort of arguing a Kantian view of this passage. What are the conditions for the possibility of the life that we have? And one of them is humility. Humility functions as a lever for the understanding of a certain way of life. And verse 17, and you say to yourselves, my own power, beware that you say to yourselves, my own power and the might of my own hand have won this wealth for me. Remember, and the Hebrew word here is zachor, not in the imperative, but zacharta. The word remember, the imperative, zachor, is always followed by an action. There are two ways of remembering. One can remember the past for its own sake. This is called nostalgia. Right? Nostalgia comes from the Greek that means the pain of remembering. Nostos is the return, the pain of the return of the past. And it gives me pain because I've lost the past, right? For the Bible, remembering doesn't just point to the past. By the way, Emily Dickinson calls nostalgia the rust of memory, which suggests that memory has another function, and here it is. Memory is a condition for the action in the future. In the Bible, every time zachor, remember, happens, it's always pointing, remember this because you have an obligation to do that. Remember the suffering of the stranger and give the stranger hospitality, right? Remember what God did for you in the past because you have obligations in the future. So here, remember is not just nostalgia, pointing to the past, the lost past, but it's a condition for the need for us to act in the future. Remember that it is the Lord your God who gives you the power to get wealth, in fulfillment of the covenant that he made on oath with your fathers, as is still the case. God didn't have to do this. God could have just minded God's own business. That's what Aristotle's God spends eternity minding his own business. What else would a God be caught up with? Why would God lower himself to think about little old you and me? The arena of change. The only thing worthy of God's attention is God's self. And what is the essence of God's self? Thinking. That's the highest activity. So God spends his whole career thinking about his thinking. God is a solipsist, caught up in himself. What else would be worthy of God's attention? But the God of the Bible has come down, so to speak, and cared about us. And God didn't have to do that. But he made a covenant with the ancestors. I will take care of you if you keep my commandments. And that's the condition for what God did for us, which causes us to have obligations. 18 again. Remember that it is the Lord your God who gives you the power to get wealth, in fulfillment of the covenant that he made on oath with your fathers, as is still the case. And now comes a warning. If you do forget the Lord your God and follow other gods to serve them or bow down to them, I warn you this day that you shall certainly perish. Here's Deuteronomy's dark view of what's possible. Like the nations that the Lord will cause to perish before you, so you shall perish, because you didn't heed the Lord your God. Or in the language that I'm promoting here, that you didn't acknowledge the power of the conditions for your obligations, and therefore your obligations. And the key is humility. Don't think that you made all the aspects of your life. It's a totally powerful passage, isn't it? And very deep. I might even call it philosophical. It's trying to point to the roots of our communal life. Any comments about that, Ellen?
I'm wondering, I think we have limited free will.
Yeah.
As an example, a woman who wants to have babies with artificial insemination, it can't right now. Or, I mean, I think we have to live by laws also.
Mm-hmm.
Control.
That's an excellent point. And it's in a way, it's another aspect of humility. I mean, this passage is pointing to the powers of our free will, if only we acknowledge certain things, which are limited, as is our free will. We do know that, don't we? Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose that's part of the tension of life, to maximize what we can do, but there's an aphorism about that, isn't there? Maximize what we can do and acknowledge what we can't. Jim?
It seems to be a little subtlety in here that in facing humility and community, I think many people don't understand or realize we're a little dependent on each other.
Yeah, there you go.
Very much so, to get anything done.
Right.
I can, if I look at it through what I do, which is construction, the guys might think they're building this house and they're doing the whole thing. No. There's hundreds of other people that will never be there, that have cut the tree down, that have made the electrical parts. My point is, community doesn't work by the individual. Whether you like it or not, you have to have humility, because you need all these other people, whether you like them or you don't like them.
Yeah, very good. Whether you acknowledge them or don't. I mean, when I do my work, I don't often think what made this what that others did made this possible. Or as the sports organizations say, there's no I in team. Yeah, that's very good. And I think a good example of that, which we have looked at, is Moses, who was called in Numbers chapter 12 the most humble individual at all. And yet, when Miriam was stricken with, let's say, leprosy, it's not clear it is, but he pleads for her. So he is acknowledging, or let's put it this way, two things happen in that passage at least. He's humble, and yet he cares for others. So I could connect them causally, that to be humble is to recognize that we don't do everything for ourselves, by ourselves. Gary?
Do you look at morality as something that is inborn, like intelligence, that's something, or is it something that was discovered perhaps by philosophers?
There you go. No, that's a great question. Morality, is our moral sense inborn, or did it come about through some cultivation, say, by thinkers to point us to or to create morality? I was just talking to somebody yesterday about an amazing article by Aharon Lichtenstein, who happened to be the son-in-law of Joseph Soloveitchik, Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, something with the title something like, "Is there the idea of natural law in Judaism?" And it's a very rich essay. I'll tell you a very quick anecdote about Aharon Lichtenstein, who I've admired for decades. So I was in Israel many, many years ago at a conference, and the conference, some of us took a tour and visited a kibbutz. And I walked into a lecture already underway by a really short, unimpressive guy in the front. And at the end of it, the moderator got up and said, "Thanks very much to Rabbi Aharon Lichtenstein for this talk." And I thought to myself, that's Aharon Lichtenstein? It was quite stunning, because when you read an article of a great person, that person is 7 feet tall, right? Aren't they? And totally strong and can do anything in the world. And here was Aharon Lichtenstein. Lichtenstein's view is there is a kind of natural law idea in Judaism, but the rabbis tried to fold it into Jewish law. But I think the Bible has a notion of natural law, frankly. I'll give you an example. Cain was never told that murder is wrong, and yet he's punished for killing Abel, right? There's no law at the time of Noah, no promulgated law, and yet the contemporaries of Noah are all punished for their evil. So that suggests that there is the idea of natural law, or we might use the word conscience, that we're born with an inherent recognition of the difference between right and wrong. Is it Saadia Gaon, the first medieval Jewish philosopher, who said about all the commandments of the Torah, if they had not been given in their present form by God, we would have been able to have developed them, because we have an inborn sense of right and wrong. In a sense, to have a list of laws is a shortcut. It's not necessary, because we, in our wisdom or in our need, would develop it. So I think Judaism does have an idea of natural law. And the nice thing about that is that it makes for the possibility of admiring different societies that don't build their moral life on the basis of some revelation. They do it through intuition, through conscience. Any society knows that unless its young honors its parents, that the community is thereby weaker. or that murder is wrong, or that stealing is wrong. It may be true, as Proudhon, what was he, an anarchist, said that property is theft. And I think that Proudhon was worried about the excessive gathering of property, so that too few people have too much and others have too little. That's of course a powerful idea. But if we don't honor the private property within reason, society can't function either. So it seems to me that the idea of natural law it's not only intrinsic in the life of lots of communities, but it's acknowledged by the Jewish tradition with a problem. Because our tradition says the 613 laws of the Torah are sufficient for our lives. So there's a sense here that revelation is enough. But in the Torah, and of course in common sense, it doesn't seem to be. I don't know. So let's turn now to another passage, and that is Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 18. So this is in the portion known as Shoftim. If you go back to chapter 16, verse 18, if you have the Jewish Publication Society, you can see right before Deuteronomy 16, verse 18, the word Shoftim, which means judges. And so this passage, starting in 16:18, deals with four major offices in ancient Judaism. Let me see if I can remember them. Judges, priests, prophets, and kings. And each is attended to in these chapters. And now we get to the king. Nobody is greater than the king. Don't you think that's true in so many societies? I mean, nobody gets a chance to have a big parade down the street when he's crowned the King of England. Just the king or the queen. So the king or the queen, the royalty, is at the top of the chain of being of a community. So let's see what this passage suggests. When he is seated, see it, 17 verse 18? When he is seated at his royal throne, he shall have a copy of this Torah, a Mishnah HaTorah Hazot. It's not clear what the word Torah means here, because Torah fundamentally means teaching. It has come to represent a scroll, the 5 books of Moses, but the idea of the Torah is much more expansive. The word Torah applies to something extremely small and extremely large in the Jewish tradition. Torah is a synonym for mitzvah, for mishpat, for law. So we can call particular laws Torot, plural. But Torah also represents the entire cultural and religious tradition of Judaism. If I say to somebody, I'm studying Torah today, I can be studying the latest edition of the magazine, the journal called Tradition, that's published by the Orthodox community. I'm studying Torah because I'm studying something about the Jewish tradition, okay? So we make a mistake to think that the king here is represented as studying the 5 books of Moses. Okay, but the king is studying the fundamental tradition, whatever its form happened to be at that time. Okay, so again, when he is seated on his royal throne, he shall have a copy of this teaching written for him. What is interesting, I'm just going to read the Hebrew here. Vayah kishvato. When he is seated al kisei on his throne of his kingdom, v'chatav lo, he shall write for himself, which is translated, he shall have written. I get that translation. He is the agent of the writing of the Torah, but he's not directly doing it, according to the translation. But the Hebrew says he's doing it. And you know, Philo, the great Alexandrian Jewish philosopher, translate this as he shall write it himself. Translate it literally. Think about the power of that Hebrew. I don't know about you, I find that when I'm reading and I find something that really makes me lift my eye off the page, I will often write it down, because writing is remembering. It's another mode of remembering. And especially if you go back to it and see your own hand having taken to those words, that just deepens your capacity to internalize it, to remember it. So there's something powerful here that the translation doesn't capture, that if the king is supposed to obey the Torah, he'd better be the agent for writing it down, because writing is memorizing or remembering. Yeah, I think that's very, very powerful. So I'm just going to read it as it comes here, but we know what it literally says. So when he is seated on his royal throne, he shall have a copy of this teaching written for him on a scroll by the Levitical priests. The Levitical priests are the ones who are given the scrolls at the end of Deuteronomy. Let it remain with him, and let him read in it all his life. I mean, what does that mean, all his life? I could say every minute of the day, or every day, or every Shabbat, but don't let him ever forget it. What, for example, should he not forget? The passage in Deuteronomy 11 that we just read. He isn't God, though he might think of himself as God, because everybody bows down to him and is afraid of him. Let it, verse 19, remain with him, and let him read in it all his life, so that he may learn to revere the Lord his God, to observe faithfully every word of this teaching as well as these laws. In other words, the highest person in a society needs to be reminded that he's not the top of the chain of being in the universe. Even though the way everybody bows to him might create in him that sense that there's nobody higher than I am. Yes, there is. There's God. I like to think sometimes about not just belief in God, but the uses of an idea of God. And here is a use of the idea of a transcendent being. A being that transcends the coming into being and the passing away of our life on earth, where everything is change, everything is temporary. What's permanent? What's higher than I am? If your view, if your view is essentially terrestrial, that is, the things on the earth are all that exists, humility is imperiled. But if you think there's something higher than you, and something higher that can hold you to account, that creates the possibility of the moral life. And you may remember that Maimonides talks about the love of God and the fear of God. The fear of God is necessary to kind of bring us into line, the possibility of reward or punishment. But ultimately, though I might do the commandments for the sake of reward, if I do the commandments for the sake of reward, I will come to recognize the intrinsic value of those commandments and come to do them for their own sake. Doing the commandments for the sake of reward, Maimonides calls the fear of God. Doing them for their own sake is the love of God. Doing them for reward puts me at the center of the universe. God is my agent, right? I'll do them, and now please give me a Porsche. If I do them for their own sake, God is the center of the universe, not me. So the king of all people needs to be sobered to recognize that worldview. And it's going to take constant reading of the Torah. You better do it often. Ellen.
I think we see that very often power corrupts, and I think we saw it in King David.
There you go. Yeah. Right. I mean, the books of Samuel and Kings are quite different in temper to this passage. Because the people ask for a king, you remember, and God says, not a good idea, and finally God relents, and they have a king, and it's trouble. And David and Solomon, the two greatest kings, are at the acme of the trouble. Of course, they're also great people, right? I mean, David makes teshuvah, repentance, in a very powerful way. He finally is brought to his senses. But, and Solomon, of course, begins to marry foreign wives and brings foreign objects of the religions into his. So this is where power corrupts. And the Torah, I think, is quite severe about that. Of course, Solomon was represented as writing 3 biblical books: Song of Songs in his youth, Proverbs in middle age, Ecclesiastes at the end of life. This is what the rabbis say about Solomon. And David wrote the whole book of Psalms, according to tradition. And David, outside the book of Psalms, does write poetry. He writes a eulogy for his general, Joab, and also for Jonathan and Saul. So he's represented outside the book of Psalms as a poet, which lends credence to the claim that he's the writer of the poetry of the book of Psalms. I saw somebody. Maya, did you? I saw, no. Okay, I thought. Doris, I see a sort of.
Well, I do, I see something in this that also applies to everybody here. And that is that the king has, by office, authority, power.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea is that you can separate the office from the personality of the person. Of the king. So I have all this authority, but I am also a humble person. And I think a good paradigm for that actually is the current pope. Because the current pope has an awful lot of authority.
Mm-hmm.
And he calls all the shots, really.
Mm-hmm.
He can change laws.
Mm.
He can do an awful lot. But as a personality, he is awfully humble. And that's an attraction. But we too, as parents, we have authority. But you could say, you're a great father. You have great authority. You have taught your children. But you also are such a good guy.
Mm.
So the personality and the office are separate.
That's so very nice.
Well, they're together, but in a way they're separate.
That's a very nice comment.
And in fact, you do that.
I do that?
Yes, you are a really great rabbi teacher.
Oh, boy.
But your personality here is.
Oh, gosh.
You listen to us.
Oh, boy.
Well, this encouragement, that's a personality that's different from your office. And we all know rabbis and priests and bishops and all of those people who just are into the authority thing. And you separate those things perfectly. That's the motto.
Is it just me, or is it getting warm in here? Oh, that's so kind of you. Do me a favor and write it down. I have a couple of children who, well, thanks very much. I didn't want it to go there. Yeah, but the point one of the points that you're making is you just never know. It's a contingent matter that the person elevated to office is the right person in terms of having some humility, recognizing the separation of the dignity of the office from the dignity of the holder. And it's not always clear that we're going to get that kind of person to do it. Yeah. 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 Yeah, we have elections because the people have wisdom. That's democracy. That's democracy. The people have wisdom. By the way, Plato, in his lining up of different modes of government, has democracy as the second worst. It's only better than tyranny. Take a look at it. It's in the Republic. I think it's book 8 or book 9. All right, we're back here. We're back here. So when he is seated on his royal throne, he shall have a copy of this teaching written for him on a scroll by the Levitical priests. Let it remain with him, and let him read it, in it, all his life, so that he may learn to revere the Lord his God, to observe faithfully every word of this teaching as well as these laws. There are things higher than the ultimate leader: God, Torah, the contents of the Torah. Thus, he will not act haughtily toward his fellows or deviate from the instruction to the right or to the left, to the end that he and his descendants may reign long in the land. A lot depends upon the king's getting that right. Let's go back to verse 14. That's what the king must do. Here's what the king should not do. If after you've entered the land that the Lord your God has assigned you and taken possession of it and settled it, and you decide, I will set a king over me as do all the nations about me, you shall be free to set a king over yourselves when chosen by the Lord your God. This is really the authorization passage for the religious person to crown the king. This notion in the Middle Ages of the divine right of kings. And who is it that enforces or makes possible the legitimacy of the king? The representative of the divine, of God. And of course, there were struggles throughout the Middle Ages. Who's the French king who had to come in a snowy weather and pay obeisance to the Pope? Anybody remember? Henry IV? Something like that? But there was this struggle between the two crowns, so to speak. Let's go back. You shall be free, verse 15, to set a king over yourself, one chosen by the Lord your God. Be sure to set as king over yourself one of your own people. You must not set a foreigner over you, one who is not your kinsman. Moreover, he shall not keep many horses or send the people back to Egypt to add to his horses, since the Lord has warned you. You must not go back that way. And he shall not have many wives, lest his heart go astray, and he shall amass silver and gold. In other words, what the king must do, let's get a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and draw a line down the middle. On the left-hand column, what the king must do, what his obligations are. On the left are what he must not do. There's only one thing in this passage on the left-hand column: study Torah. In the right-hand column, there are a bunch of things he can't do, right? So the power of the king is limited by negative commandments. And what he should do is spend his life studying Torah. And look, we could soften that down by saying every morning before the king goes to the palace and has everybody bow down to him and say yes to him, he should spend a couple of hours. He can watch MSNBC, he can watch Morning Joe, but he should be studying Torah. Then he can go to work. Okay? It's a fabulous passage, isn't it, about the role of humility in the highest offices. Cindy?
Isn't there a paradox here
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually. Because God is not speaking. God is not saying, yeah, you're right, this is the guy, or wrong, this is the right. Well, it creates something of a power vacuum. So we need somebody to represent God since God is not speaking. And there comes the religious leader. In the Jewish tradition, it's the seminary, the Rosh Yeshiva, the president of the seminary, who ordains, who lays on hands, smicha, who lays on hands on those who are going to become rabbis. So we become rabbis by the transfer of the authority from the leader, the religious leader, to us, that chain of tradition which goes back to Moses. So it raises a very interesting question. Yes, you're authorized to have a king, but what exactly is the process? So that vacuum creates answers. The answer of democracy is the people is sovereign. And therefore, vox populi, vox Dei, right? The voice of the people is the voice of God. Think about it. Vox populi, vox Dei is the... So there are many different answers to that question. The answer of the monarchy is inheritance, is that the throne will pass down from one generation of the king to another. That solves that problem. In other words, there's a vacuum. You're free to do it, but I'm not going to tell you how. And then there are many ways of trying. What's the basic idea here? What is the ground for the legitimacy of the author? Is it God through God's emissary? Is it the people? Is it biology? That's dynastic power. And that solves the problem, doesn't it? Sort of. What if the oldest child is clearly not the right person? Then you have a big problem. I mean, Solomon is the fourth in line of David's sons. So it's, what legitimizes? What are other ways in which it's done? Constitutions tell us something about who. I mean, in our Constitution, the powers of Congress come first and then the power of the president. Isn't that true? So that the legislature is the dominant power in the chronology of the Constitution. Maya?
So I don't know when the editors edited this text. It's probably when there were kingdoms. And I think that what this chapter tries to establish that God is über alles. That, you can choose a king, but it has to be okayed by God. You can write your teaching, but it has to be okayed by the clergy. So
you did something quite interesting there. By God, by the clergy. You started by saying by God and then by the clergy. So that's the vacuum or the paradox that Cindy points out that we have to solve. Yeah. Is the clergy always right? Yes. I'll say yes. Okay, yeah, please.
The wish for a king, or you might say a David, seems to be a thing that runs through history. Even up until today.
Yeah.
And it seems like the people find somebody that they think he's a savior, and then they decide he was anointed by God.
Say that again. The people can decide that this is the right person, and then...
And then to reinforce that, they decide that he was anointed by God.
The people say that in order to reinforce their decision.
Yes. And then that person becomes some kind of Messiah.
Absolute.
And holy and anointed.
Yeah.
And I think it's been proven that pretty often results in some of the most horrendous wars you can think of.
Well, there we
World
go.
War II. I mean, political Messiah back then, in 1939,
Mhm.
happened in Germany,
Yeah,
the political Messiah.
yeah.
And
Right.
when he marched into foreign countries, there were even people there giving them, their conquerors, flowers, and this is wonderful, because they thought he was going to be their Messiah too.
Right.
But
Boy,
it
that-
doesn't end well.
That's a very good point, and I think one of the assumptions behind your comment is we people need an authority, and we're ready to place it in a certain individual to our peril. And maybe that's where constitutionalism was an attempt to moderate that human impulse to repose authority in one person. Because basically, Constitution reflects not substance, but process, right? Constitutional government focuses on process. And if the process is done right, then we have, or have to have, confidence in the result. And process is a way of mitigating the need for one particular person to represent us and to be the authority. And this passage, I don't mean to elevate this passage beyond its beyond its application, but this passage is concerned about this question of giving over to one person. And actually, lots of time, I mean, think of Hitler. Hitler was a master of the art of rhetoric. He knew how to do it. And you may remember Plato's distinction between poor rhetoric and philosophical rhetoric. Philosophical rhetoric is the use of the arts of persuasion to advance knowledge, whereas bad rhetoric is used to flatter the tastes of the audience. More sugar in the cake. Cake is not that good for you, and more sugar is even worse, but that flatters the taste. So that kind of cook is likely to win the approbation of the community. Whereas carrots and turnips produce long life. And I always ask, why couldn't God make carrots taste like Russian tea biscuits? It could. Why wasn't that possible? Okay, let's go back. I want to look at one more passage, and then we'll look at the sheet that I handed out. And that is Micah chapter 6. So these minor prophets are a little hard to find. In my book, which is Hebrew English, it's on page 1348. Micah 6.
Is page 1041.
1011.
No, 1041.
1041. So let's start chapter 6, verse 6. Okay? Beginning with, what shall I approach the Lord? Everybody kind of there? 1051. Do I hear 1061? Chapter 6 of Micah, verse 6. Okay. 1051. Okay. This is the toughest part of the morning, isn't it? With what shall I approach the Lord? Do homage to God on high. Shall I approach him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Would the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with myriads of streams of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for my sins? Okay, so let's pause there for a minute. No, then it goes on. He has told you, O man, what is good, okay? So what seems to be stated here is that God doesn't want sacrifices, but wants something of the moral life. I think that would be a misreading, because it would suggest that Micah is saying that sacrifices are worthless, and the only thing that's worth anything is the moral life. I'm not sure about this, but I think this is not the prevailing view of most of the prophets. I think what the prophets are suggesting is the moral life takes precedence over sacrifices, but the sacrifices are not nothing. The sacrifices remain valuable, but not as valuable. Now, I know that this reading can be of the form X, but not Y, or in order, not X, sacrifices, but instead Y. But I think that would be over-reading. So, and I'm not sure about this. It would take lots of investigation about what the prophets say about sacrifices. We read on Yom Kippur afternoon, Isaiah chapter 56, which he talks about the fast. Let's see if I can find it real fast. Oh, I don't know. I can't, but I think it's in there somewhere. Chapter 56, okay. What God wants is not sacrifices, but the sacrifice of the heart, fasting. Okay, so now we're at 6:8. He has told you, O man, what is good and what the Lord requires of you, only to do justice, to love goodness, and to walk modestly with your God. Then will your name achieve wisdom. Okay? So what Micah has done here is kind of reduce the commandments, all the commandments, to 3. Asot mishpat, to do works of justice. Va'ahavat chesed, the translation is to love goodness, but sometimes to love mercy. Chesed, loving kindness. V'hatznei leched im Elohecha, to walk with humility before your God. Then will your name achieve wisdom. If you want to ask what is wisdom, it's the combination of these 3 things. Anybody want to say something about this? I mean, in a certain way, they stand for themselves, but I've always wondered why these 3. And one answer in general might be that if you do all 3 of these things, you've essentially done everything. Or that these are the chapter headings. If one wants to think of the 613 commandments of the Torah as everything, I know we don't have to, but let's just say that, then these 3 things are the chapter headings of each of the 613 commandments. I'm not saying that is the case, but I'm wondering if it's the case that everything is embraced in sum by these 3 things. So I could say justice, mercy, humility. What is not included there? I know this is an unfair question, but you think I'm right about that? That this is everything reduced to 3? Gary?
Civility.
I'm sorry?
Civility.
Civility is extra legal, isn't it? Be nice, be civil to one another. So I might say civility is, what is it? What is it? It can't be commanded, but it's necessary. So you would say that these 3 are not comprehensive, that for a healthy society, something else is needed. Ron?
I think in response to your, I think civility is a product of doing justice and loving goodness. So it may not be set forth, but if you look at what civility is,
Yeah,
it's a combination, it's the progeny of those two things.
okay.
Therefore, with all respect, you're right.
I, what'd you say, Gary?
It's a form of behavior, it's an act of behavior. So doing goodness and walking modestly, those are aspects of behavior as well. So I would just add, I don't disagree with you, but I would just add it as an emphasis point.
Yeah, deciding that depends on how elastic you're taking these three terms to be. And it seems to me that you, Gary, have a limit to the elasticity, and Ron's is elastic enough to embrace. I mean, one of the ways of thinking about this is, are there things which can't be commanded, but which nevertheless are incumbent upon us? I don't know, but can you command chesed, loving kindness? Maybe already this is embracing that which can't be commanded. Anyway, it's an interesting idea, isn't it? Eddie?
Well, I believe it's doing something very interesting because it says to do justice, all right? So it's already telling you, and what is justice? Well, it's everything that's been taught so far. But not only do justice, but love goodness, which is an internal thing that you have to approach. Not just doing it, but love doing it. And then to walk modestly with your God. So that's the humble.
Okay.
You have to be modest in the way you walk with God. So I believe it's dealing with our relationship with the divine, with our fellow men and women. Sorry. In Spanish, it encompasses everything. And also our relationship with ourselves.
Where does that come in? Humility?
When it says to walk humbly.
Humbly.
I believe that's where, so, yeah, I think I'm being very elastic to trying to put all the Torah, and I don't mean just the 5 books, but all the Torah
All Torah.
in those 3 things. Therefore, it's not canceling the sacrifices, but it's saying it's not enough to do the sacrifices just in a mechanical way. But you have to actually, ponder upon what you're doing.
That's quite elegant. So what you're suggesting is the vertical and the horizontal. The vertical is our relationship with God. The horizontal is our relationship to one another. And you've reduced, that's the wrong word, but I'll say it anyway. You've reduced the first 2 to basically one thing divided into 2 components. Doing and feeling, the external and the motivation. Do justice, but don't just do it, because that could be mechanical. Feel it, mean it, motivation matters. That's the horizontal. Doing justice, what else is there? But counting, internalizing, that's the horizontal. And walk humbly with God involves both God and me. I'm to recognize subordination to God, but also the one who is feeling the subordination is me, and I have to recognize something about myself. And any domain can be briefly fully encompassed with the vertical and the horizontal. If I want to talk about this room structurally, I'll just draw one line here and one line there, and basically I've covered everything, right? So the combination of the vertical has 2 components, external and internal, and the horizontal has fundamentally action. So you've made a case for the completeness of these 3 things. It's very nice. Jim?
Well, the 3 things that we're talking about are something you have to continually do it one day and you're all set, which is synonymous with the 613 mitzvot, because we all agree, yeah, you gotta try it. You're not gonna live long enough or be capable enough to do it. And so in that way, these three statements, in a logistic way, cover the 613, because you're almost fighting your own inclinations 24/7 to achieve this thing, because somehow we're not built to really automatically do it.
I like that. So you're taking Eddie's idea of comprehensiveness and saying, adding something to it, that it's an aspiration.
Well, it's implying strongly that unless you make an effort, your natural inclination isn't to do these things.
So what Eddie has done is he's given a spatial understanding of these three, the horizontal and the vertical, and you're adding the temporal, time to space, that it's going to take us all of our lives to make progress and we'll never fully achieve it. But this is a strong argument for the comprehensiveness of this passage. No, I think you're putting it together very nicely. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
You would be modest within your community. In other words, you would not be haughty. You're not doing this, I'm better than you because I do good, et cetera.
And that's the walk humbly part.
It's humbly to your God.
Oh, it's humbly to your God. And you're adding to that,
To your community.
humble in terms of the community.
In other words, you're trying to, you're not being haughty, I'm better than you because I do all these things.
That's very good. So you're reminding us that humility in some of our earlier passages has both ethical and spiritual connotations. It has a relationship with God, but also a relationship to one another. So humility, in a way, becomes the master value, because just thinking in terms of the spatialness, it covers all my relationship to everything in space and time, God and the rest of society. That adds to the power, the idea of the comprehensiveness of this. I really never thought of all of this myself. I've just always stopped with wondering how comprehensive. And by the way, we're going to turn to this passage next, where the Micah passage is not the final reduction, which then will cause us another question. Vivian?
Speaking of wondering, I'm wondering if you might unpack the word walk for us a little bit. That word really stands out for me in this passage.
Yeah.
I mean, this line seems to be more than humility. It is some action.
That's nice, because the word is lechet, which means to walk. To walk.
So it's just walking. So what do you make of that? What do you make of that?
I have nothing. I really don't off the top of my head. Anybody have an idea about that? Tell me your name, please.
Rem.
R-E-M. Rem.
So for me, looking at this passage, I look at the verbs like you were, and I see do, love, walk.
Uh-huh.
Do justice for me feels very in your head rational. Love goodness, in your heart emotional. Walk, combine the two and go forward.
And it's physical.
So walk, how you walk combines whatever commitments we have made with our head and with our hearts. I like that. How about that? It's not just walking, it's a very deep kind of going, of living. How you live, it's how you live. Walk now is what would we call this? A synecdoche, a part for the whole. How we walk is how we live. I like that. Boy, we are digging stuff out of here, aren't we? Malcolm?
Just conjures for me, I know it's not the same phrase or verb, but
Yeah.
an admonition to Abraham to get up and go.
Yeah, there you go.
So,
Very good, very good. And you would say, on the basis of what Rem has said, it's not just a going. You know, I think I'll take a walk to the store. No, walk here really is a deep how one lives. And how one lives depends upon how much you have cultivated the things of the mind and the things of the heart. Lech lecha, right. And halacha, which is Jewish law, but really as a walking, as a way, as a going. In other words, it's a dynamic set of rules to be enacted and not just read and studied. Lynn?
Walking implies, to me, a companionship with God as you proceed through life and try to live by these values. I see companionship.
So when anybody takes a walk, they should recognize they're in some ways walking with God. What does that mean, walking with a deeper intention?
Well, you don't have to do this by your own power, that you always have, I mean, these three things, you always have support behind you that provides an undergirth to when things are difficult.
I love that. Wow. It's not just a matter of taking a walk.
Right. That's where the companionship
Get in?
Well, I'm going back to your Heschel, is walking in wonder, which is everything. I mean, that line to me just encompasses, and everyone has said that, in one way or the other, everything.
So beside everything we've said so far, space and time, part and whole, there is an increase in power in these three, walking being the climactic part of this. Head and heart, how you walk, walking with God, intentionality. I'll tell you what this conversation that we've just been having reminds me of. So some of you know the composer Richard Strauss, who wrote Salome and Electra and Rosenkavalier and all kinds of great things. And he was also a conductor. And Strauss was asked once, what is his theory of conducting? And he said, my theory of conducting is to get up in front of the orchestra and to stay out of its way. That's how I feel right here, actually. I mean, I said to you, what can we make of this? I'm puzzled by it. Look at what flowered here. I mean, we really have, are we recording this? We really should. No, this is an amazing flowering. Look what we've made of it. I'm just repeating myself because this has been a wonder for me. Okay, well, with this in mind, let us turn to the passage. I want to try to do this today and to start on something else next week, which we don't have to do. We can come back to this. So if you look at the very bottom line, you can see Makot 23b to 24a. So this is a passage from a Talmudic tractate, okay? And it's about, the title is my own making, maybe you'll disagree with it, the 613 commandments and their essence. And you'll notice if you go down to the fourth small paragraph from the bottom, there's the Micah. You see it? So this is about the reduction by different hands of the 613 to an increasingly narrow distillation of the essence of these 613 commandments. And lo and behold, Micah is not at the end. So I would say that if whoever the author of this passage was, if he or she were to sit here and hear the conversation we just had, I think they would be sorely put to not put the Micah at the end. So, because I think we've essentially said the Micah passage is everything. So let's see what else there is. So let's start at the beginning. The 613 commandments introduced by the Talmud, this is me copying this, so there are probably some mistakes here. There are that's the title, so to speak, the 613 Commandments, Introduction Talmud, whatever I meant there. These are 613 commandments in the Torah, 248 positive commandments, the do's, and 365 negative commandments, the don'ts. Rabbi Simlai, when preaching, said 613 precepts were communicated to Moses, 365 negative corresponding to the number of the days of the year, and 248 positive precepts corresponding to the number of members of a person's body, joints, bones, covered with flesh, and so on. So notice how powerful that is. This is the claim that the 613 commandments are comprehensive. All of me, all the time. In a very lovely kind of poetic way. Said Rabbi Humna, what is the proof text for this? It is Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe, which is from Deuteronomy, Morashah Kehilat Yaakov, translation, Moses commanded us a Torah, an inheritance of the congregation of Jacob, from Deuteronomy. In letter value, Torah is 611. So you know that every letter of the alphabet is given a number. Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, Gimel is 3, Yud is 10, Kaf is 20, Lamed is 30, and so on, up to 400. Okay? So Torah, the letters of Torah, 4 of them, their numerical value adds up to 611. Tav, from Torah, is 400. Vav, To, is 6. Resh, Torah, the Resh, 200. Hey is 5. Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Daled, Hey, 5. Vav, 6. That adds up to 611. Oops, that's too short. The first 2 of the 10 commandments, I am the Lord your God and you shall have no other gods, are not counted here because we heard them directly from the mouth of God. And if you look at the 10 commandments, that's what happens. There's you in the first 2 commandments and not in the others, I think, something like that. And the Midrash is the people did hear the beginning of the 10 commandments and they got frightened. This is too much for us, too close. So we're going to leave and you get the rest of them and bring them to us, okay? So we have Torah equals 611, and the 2 we heard, 613. So Torah equals everything. I'm the Lord your God, and so on, directly from the mouth of God, okay? Known as the Taryag mitzvot. You take the Hebrew letters, Taf, Vav, Resh, Hey, Tar, Yag, the 613 commandments. King David came and reduced the 613 to 11, as it is written in Psalm 15, and here they are. If you look at Psalm 15, the prophet Isaiah, I'm skipping, came and reduced them to 6, as it is written in Isaiah chapter 33, and there they are. The prophet Micah came and reduced them to 3, as it is written, and there they are again. Again, the prophet Isaiah came and reduced them to 2. Thus says the Lord, this is the challenge for us. Thus says the Lord, keep justice and do righteousness. Mishpat, justice, righteousness, tzedek. I think it's tzedakah in the passage. The prophet Amos came and reduced them to 1. As it is said, for thus said the Lord to the house of Israel, seek me and live. Dirshuni vichyu, seek me and live. Now Habakkuk wasn't satisfied with Amos's 1, and he has an alternative, single most important, or no, the one that encompasses all of it. Habakkuk came and based them on one principle, as it is said, but the righteous shall live by his faith. Okay, but a tzaddik, be'emunato, in his faith, yichya, shall live. So, what do you make of this? We've made a great case for Micah saying everything. Are the attempts by Amos and by Habakkuk even more potent in their brevity? Ellen?
I don't think so. I think that Micah, for human beings, gives us a breakdown of what we might call all-inclusive of these other two one sentences. But it gives us a guide that we can break down with.
Your argument, it seems to me, is something like the following. We may be able to reduce it further, but to have three things instead of one thing gives us a much better head start in understanding. So there's such a thing as excessive reduction. That sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it? Too much littleness. That's an interesting point. What would I do with just one thing? Yeah. Other thoughts, Bennett?
I always do these as disengaging people like the play. And when you reduce it down to one, it's theoretically so encompassing that you can do anything you want with it. I mean, you're trying to limit, and I don't really see the value in playing these games.
You think, for example, baseball is just a game people play? I'm sorry?
I do, but it's not always limited to just 9 innings.
Very good. Very good. I'm just teasing you on that. So Bennett is sort of making an interesting claim, a challenging claim, that really this is like crossword puzzles. We get up in the morning and we work on the puzzle for a little bit. It helps get us awake. It's just something we do. Nothing really depends on it. Don't make too big a deal out of it and so on. Yeah, it's a challenge.
I mean, I'm not keeping my brain young.
I'm sorry?
You mean I'm not keeping my brain young by working on the crossword puzzle every day?
Okay, so there, you're resisting the idea that it's just a game. It's got some value. I'm in your camp. Doris?
What about, I know this may sound like excessive reduction, but I go for Deuteronomy 30. After all of the commandments are given, God says, choose life. That's it for me.
Choose life.
It's why you're merging, to choose life. So you have that as the major command. Yeah. And as Deuteronomy 30 says, you don't have to go up to the heavens to find it or deep blue sea to find it. That's it. And all of these that we are reading is how you choose life. By doing, by don't doing, and the last two, the Amos and Habakkuk, are really repetitions of choose life. They're the broad strokes, whereas the 613 are the narrow strokes all the way down the line of the house.
And in favor of your view, both the Amos and the Habakkuk have the word life in them. Yeah. Seek me and live, but the righteous shall live by his faith.
And I think that incidentally, the Micah really compresses the how. Those things.
The how. So what you're suggesting is there is an essential single imperative, but in order to really fully get it, we need some commentary. We need the Micah, we need the 10, and so on. But let's be clear of what the fundamental goal is, the fundamental idea. That's an argument for distillation. In a way, it's accepting the reduction, but understanding the limitation of it. You know, if Bennett will excuse me, I'm going to use a metaphor from baseball. There's only one thing that pitchers need to know. Get the ball over the plate. Do not walk anybody. If you give up walks, you're asking for trouble. The question is not only how do I do that, but what do I mean by the plate? In my baseball days, anything over the plate was a victory. Now we're talking about quality strikes. When I was pitching, the idea of quality strikes was not an issue. Dear God, let me get it over the plate. And now you hit the corner, or you throw the curveball that doesn't go over the plate, but the batter thinks it does. So it's true, one thing should be said, get the ball over the plate, but it needs commentary to know how to operationalize it. Baseball is not just a game. I'm teasing you. You know that. Ron.
It seems to me that the Micah is instructive. The Micah says, here's how you do, here's how you act, here's how you walk the walk. Don't just talk the talk, walk the walk.
Walk, emphasis on walk.
The Amos and the Isaiah and the Habakkuk are not instructive. They are merely rules.
Oh, that's good. That's good. That's good. Goals and doing, getting the instruments for getting there. Very good. Wow, we have really done amazingly, I think, here. But humility seems in its different manifestations. I think that's one of the things, at least I've learned by this study, that humility has a lot of different manifestations. Not just our relationship to God, our relationship to one another, what are the foundations, and so on and so on. It's a big, big idea, isn't it? And Micah gets to it. And an argument for not reducing it to one is that though we all agree that if we're going to limit it to one or reduce it to one, we still have to elaborate. And we might miss the Micah. We might miss the humility one. So it's good to have it. Great. Okay, so unless we want to come back to this passage, I think we've done a really good job on it. Eddie, you have a comment?
That's a question, actually, because I believe the prophets are, they're giving a message to the people, but you have to remember what the time setting and the audience is. So maybe that has to do with how they summarize the Torah in such a way. So do you know what happens to Amos and other prophets? Are they post-exilic? Are they?
I think they're all pre-exilic. Amos is certainly, I think we can pinpoint when Amos gave his one lecture, Rosh Hashanah morning of 753 before the Common Era. It says somewhere 2 years before the earthquake, and scholars now pinpoint when the earthquake went, 721. Yeah, Isaiah, though, is before, in, and after. So I don't know when Habakkuk was, frankly. But I think Eddie's making a good point. This is also rhetoric, and rhetoric depends upon mindfulness of the audience and not just the thing itself. Wonderful discussion. Next week we'll have a new topic. Shabbat Shalom.
Walk humbly, to me, that was referring that God is always by your side. He knows more than you. You should be humble.
I like that. I like that. Think of it, walk as if God is with you all the time. I like
That's
that.
right.
I love that.
I missed a couple ones, but you had one where you're doing Moses and God were arguing, so to speak, or Moses was pointing out to God at Sodom and Gomorrah. And I didn't think that he was being humble to be humble in the sight of the Lord.
Yes.
But he didn't want to really take this forcefully as an argument, and God would harden his heart and destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. That he was trying to, okay, let's not argue about this anymore. We both have opinions. Think about it, Lord. And
So you're saying that what may look like humility is basically a ploy.
right, at that point.
At that point.
Because, you know, I think of before the Exodus, you know, and the Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he wasn't going to change his mind about doing all these things. God hardened his heart. Maybe God's heart was hardened. It was not wanting to listen to, you know, I'm tired of arguing with you. I'm going to go ahead and do this. I know more than you. So Moses didn't want to get into that.
You're talking about Abraham, I think, in Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah. Oh, it was Abraham. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Moses argued with God too.
Yeah, but,
I see what you're saying. So that beneath the surface of that conversation, there are a lot of things going on.
Going on. Yeah.
Abraham is wondering, how can I make my point? I think I'll be humble.
I've already made my point. To continue this, he's just going to get more adamant and say, "I'm going to do it." You know.
That could be a nice foundation for a seminar discussion about.
I thought it was an interesting way to look at
the
it.
depth of that conversation. What's going on the surface? What might be really going on?
Right.
Because we're that way too.
Yeah.
Sometimes if we're arguing with somebody or having a discussion,
And I get so caught up in my opinion that I'm not listening anymore.
and maybe I should just back off for a little bit. I love it. That's great. Are you a baseball fan?
I enjoy baseball, but I'm not a fan like you are.
That's great.
And your analogies are really very insightful.
Oh, good. I thought about that.
I enjoy them.
Oh, good. I'm so glad.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's true. I have a passion for it. And remember the good old days. Yeah, very good, very good. Take care. Take care.
I don't know if you know the contemporary author Marilyn Robinson.
I know of her. I don't think I've read anything. Gilead, is that Marilyn Robinson? I've read
She's
Gilead.
most famous for.
I have read that.
She is about to publish or have released a book. I think it's entitled Reading Genesis or Understanding Genesis.
You're referring to the New Yorker article.
Well, I didn't see the article. I was actually just listening to an interview. Ezra Klein had an interview with her.
Because then the current New Yorker has a piece on it, which I started reading last night, but I didn't get that far.
She's a brilliant person.
Is she? I love Gilead.
And I just wonder. I mean, we'll see what her treatment of Genesis is, but she reminds me somewhat of some of the perspectives Doris brings us, and I wonder if introducing that sort of contemporary perspective to this, or another form of a year's study would be, a treatment or a use of, more contemporary perspective. She has a clearly Christian perspective, but her perspectives are universal.
It's not oppressive.
Yeah.
We did Maimonides on the Bible one year, many years ago. And I think next year's Torah study is likely to be different because Fairmont people are going to be joining. So I've been thinking a little bit of what I should do, and my current view is Torah portion of the week. It's a nice way of going back to fundamentals.
Sure.
But I do like your idea, what you are suggesting. And by the way, when we did the Maimonides, somebody bought everybody a book. And we'd have to presuppose that people who are interested would also be reading that book along with us, although of course I could bring in excerpts every week. I think it's a lovely idea. Let me go back to the, has that book been published or is it about to be?
Released.
It's just being released.
It's not out yet.
I'll take a look at it actually. It's a great idea. Yeah.
Anyway, the other question I have, so as look forward to your participating or leading the Mason's Bar Mitzvah service next week. I'm somewhat embarrassed or whatever to tell you. I don't think I've ever attended a Bar Mitzvah service at Temple-Tifereth. So, is there any customs relative to the Aliyah? And I don't, that we should be aware of, or I should be aware of.
So, what I do when I talk to parents about it is first find out how many aliyahs there are going to be, because the bar mitzvah boy or the bat mitzvah girl always gets the last one.
Yeah.
And we tend to have, I would say, we try to have the minimum of 3 verses per aliyah. So if the boy does 9, he gets 3 aliyahs, he has the last 2 to give away. If he does 12, 4 aliyahs. If he does 8, 2 aliyahs, the last one being his. I don't know how many Mason has.
Matt and Wendy figured that. I presume they know that and they figured that out.
Okay, so what I tend to say to people is, first of all, it's up to you. But one way of thinking about it is grandparents for the first aliyah, parents for the second aliyah, the boy for the third. That is rarely how it happens, because sometimes people want to include some aunts and uncles. So you could do the grandparents. Sometimes the grandparents give the talus, in which case they don't need an aliyah, for example. So the parents can be first, aunts and uncles, perhaps some cousins who have become bar or bar mitzvah. So there are a lot of ways of doing it. Some parents don't want to